joining us. This is our first event of the term, and there's 3 other competing events, so we're very happy to see you all here. My name is Sherief Gaber. I'm the director of the Middle East Studies Center. I wanted to make an announcement, a very happy and exciting announcement, that Mosireen has joined us as associate director. We're really, really excited to be hosting Sherief Gaber, who is one of the, he's part of this film collective called Mosireen, who are, I think, one of the most inspiring group of people really working on revolutionary practices in the last few years. He's also a researcher in housing rights and community development, issues that are very dear to many of our hearts and really urgent in the present time. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming him.
Hi. I'm going to just kind of give some really broad remarks and then maybe open up to questions since there's so many people here. How long do I have, Sherief?
You have until 2. Some folks will have classes. Yeah, so...
So maybe I'll try and maybe speak quickly.
Okay.
Just say some things and then open up to questions. I didn't bring videos because of the time I know is short and it takes up a lot. Maybe we'd rather just talk, or maybe we wouldn't, and then we can find someone to just I guess I wanted to sort of talk today about, I guess the title was the battle of political memory. I think it's really an important question. I don't think it's strange to say that the battle over memory is one of the sort of main battles that we are facing right now in the midst of what is otherwise just an incredibly severe crackdown, a demobilization on the streets, and a difficulty of kind of engaging in the same sort of public practices that we have been engaged in the past 3 years. We find ourselves, whether by force or simply because recognizing the importance of it, kind of dealing with the memories and the kind of recent political history of the past 3 years. We find ourselves questioning and fighting over what really happened sometimes at given points, what the events that happened mean, what they meant then, what they mean now. We have a media and a state which is engaged in just an incredibly pernicious revisionism currently, going as far as, I think, just frankly lying, which is nothing new per se for them, in order to justify their activities now, in order to justify the continuing kind of revanchist process of ripping back the past 2 years, of attempting to undo it, which I think is impossible, but this is at the same time an incredibly kind of dangerous situation to find ourselves in. So amidst this, you have people who bore witness to events in the past 3 years, whether directly by participating in them, or whether simply seeing them, simply being a part of a society that has undergone an incredible amount of transformation and flux, as much as things may not have changed, as much as we say that, I think things have changed substantially and will continue to. So at times as well, the kind of questions of memory and the battle for memory takes an internal character. As many of those same people who witnessed or participated come to ask ourselves, I guess, if what happened actually meant anything at all. As we kind of reach a point where a lot of us are very depressed or very demobilized, as we feel the kind of police state returning directly or indirectly. I mean, we find ourselves in conflict with the memories of, with the bleakness of the present, and we begin to maybe in some ways doubt that we really did witness something which was, if only briefly, truly emancipatory and had a real utopian possibility. I mean, in some ways it was so quick that we are able and willing at times to convince ourselves, in order to sort of escape from the bleakness of the present, that this obviously didn't happen, that it must have been a kind of conspiracy or a plot from the beginning, that we never had the power that we felt at the time. This is think another kind of point at which we find ourselves fighting against ourselves. And related to that, I think there's a third way that we see ourselves fighting against nostalgia for 2011, for the 18 days, for some of the events that followed it. Of a struggle now that we face when we kind of contrast those hopes of the past with the current reality. And it's a difficulty to stay within the present. I mean, it's more comforting at times to feel that we can retreat into the good old days, even though the good old days in this case are only a couple of years or a couple months ago. I think that that kind of nostalgia of at times even fetishizing where we were a couple of years ago and using that to actually justify how bad things are now, or to kind of really mark the death knell of a kind of revolutionary moment. I think that's an incredibly dangerous thing as well. I mean, you could even say that there's a third kind of site at which we're fighting over sort of political memory, insofar as we are still dealing with the legacies of a 60-year-old state. I mean, there's this sort of fetishization of Nasser and Nasserism right now, and of Sadat, and even, and I really do not know which is more absurd of the two, of Mubarak and the king. I mean, people are constantly saying, that we lived in better days, that, Egypt of, long ago where everything was better. I mean, I think that is, a different topic maybe, because it's a much longer period in history, but it's one that I think is just as pernicious and incredibly dangerous. It also sketches out, I think, a very important kind of question of a generational war that we're facing, as, I think that a large component of the current sort of crackdown and the current kind of reformation has a generational component that is attempting, I think it's a last gasp in some ways. I mean, I don't want to be overly optimistic, of a generation or two that is attempting to kind of maintain the fleeting sort of perquisites of their own power as the world around them is sort of indelibly changed and transformed. Hopefully they do not last too much longer, with all due respect to them. So, I mean, these are, I guess, a few of the ways in which I see the kind of battleground over memory. These are the places, I think, where those battles are fought. And I don't know how we're to win it, because we are still engaged within the very processes which are kind of creating those memories, and the events that transpired over the past 3 years are not past as much as they remain present. And so I think it is still, even as we argue over what they meant, I think it forces them into a present. We're not talking about what will be written in the history books when we fight over who was at Muhammad Mahmoud or who did what. This is not a question of what we are to tell our children as much as it is a question of where do we stand now, what gains have been made, what has been lost. I think that if we were to focus just on kind of history as dead letter, then we would lose. And I think that like I said, these kind of issues of nostalgia are some of the greatest threats, more even I think than the kind of media chorus that's attacking us, because we can fight against them, but fighting against ourselves tends to be much more difficult. There's a quote from, and I find myself constantly going back to Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history, which I think is just one of the most complex and beautiful writings of the 20th century. And I find myself rereading it maybe once a month, trying to kind of scry insight from it like a soothsayer almost. I think it's that kind of text. He says at one point, he says, to articulate what is past does not mean to recognize how it really was. It means to take control of a memory as it flashes in a moment of danger. So he says later in the same paragraph, he says that the only writer of history with the gift of setting alight the sparks of hope in the past is the one who is convinced of this, that not even the dead will be safe from the enemy if he is victorious, and this enemy has not ceased to be victorious. I mean, these two quotes, I think, give us a basis of how we have to understand the present moment, providing us with a method and an imperative to take the recent past as a matter for present struggle, and showing us the stakes of the battle that we wage. If we say that we desired the fall of the regime, I mean, this is an enormous undertaking. The conditions of failure are very present, but the conditions of victory are vague. I mean, when you seek to bring something new into the world, the ability to describe it on the basis of our present understanding and our kind of limited, kind of realist conditions, I mean, those tend to be incredibly impoverished. So it's very easy to see how, you know, in fighting over memory, it's, you find yourself in a bind where you can't rely on you have to rely on the past, but you cannot kind of rely simply on it. You have to attempt to use it to bring in something that you don't know yet what it would be. At Mosireen, over the past 2.5, 3 years, I think we've tried to fight these battles. The first video that we put out as a collective was right after the Mosquito Massacre. We called it What Really Happened at the Mosquito Massacre, which I guess in light of the Benjamin quote maybe is the wrong thing to have called it, but I think that what was, you know, part of the emphasis at the time was simply an attempt to tell a story that was, you know, there were not the same amount of cameras there because it was a march organized by the church, because there wasn't the same kind of contingent of media-savvy activists there as you might see in some of the other protests at this time. The documentation was sparse, but also, I mean, I think we all saw the, you know, I mean, in a preview of what we're seeing now, the extent to which the media, by kind of screaming a particular narrative, was directly attempting to transform the events. So that, you know, in a way, our first kind of entry into producing video as a collective was really on kind of questions of what memory would mean, you know, sort of past, present, and future. Afterwards, we were involved in making videos with and for Kazirun, the military alliance campaign. I think that this was an attempt to bring forward kind of evidence from a recent past at times, evidence from the very present, and to link, you know, statements of the military officials and the state officials directly with the images of the crimes that they sought to deny. It wasn't, you know, memory here, it's not that we're trying to establish a chain of events, that this is a cause and effect kind of thing, that this is how you end up at the military claiming these things. But I think that what we really wanted to do was kind of to show just the enormity of the contradiction involved in these single statements that they made, and to juxtapose those with images in such a way as the statement, the lie, could not be heard without immediately associating it, tying it with the events that impeach it. You know, more recently, you know, since July 3rd, since Rawah, since the incredible escalation of violence that we've seen by the police, I think we've also attempted to deal with this. You know, we've created several videos using the slogan, which is a chant, or the beginning of a chant, to kind of never forget, always remember. Using kind of memories and images of the past, we have an enormous archive that we're very fortunate to have, that's the kind of result of hundreds of people sending footage to us. And the imperative, I guess, for the archive is always to keep it, to prevent it from being simply a repository that will just kind of collect dust, and that, you know, no offense, but scholars can kind of look up 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, but actually to use it as, in some ways, an arsenal, a kind of storeroom wherein one can go and retrieve those things in the past which are of the present. You know, so we have taken these images and we attempt to kind of recombine and reconfigure. I mean, there have been so many times where we have been looking at, you know, where we've used something or we haven't used something, or we've put something in the archive and found only later that now it is relevant, whereas it wasn't necessarily relevant before, that it becomes relevant under different sets of conditions. And this is something to me that's, you know, speaks, I think, to this question of, you know, taking control of a memory as it flashes in a moment of connection. I mean, this question, you know, one does not know kind of, I guess, in advance what's important as much as one decides what has been important, you know, in light of a present political struggle. So, I guess, I mean, and I, you know, I guess I would love to kind of talk about this, because I think that this is I think this is an active debate that we have to have with ourselves. I think that when we, even in Mosireen, we are having, a difficult time in doing the same work that we did. Perhaps we fall on these kind of videos using the archive because it is a much more dangerous environment to actually go and film and document. And because in some ways the kind of political trajectories still remain very unclear. But I think that where we have been successful in the past 8 months has been the point at which we have been able to reclaim something of the memory of the past 3 years, and not just wear it as a badge to say that we were there, that we did this, that this is how it was, but to actually use it to say something now. To take, let's say, Mohammed Ibrahim, the Minister of Interior, and to look at actually, well, who appointed him? What did he do at different points in his tenure before and after Morsi? How are these chains of events, how are these different kind of sequences of events relevant now when we're seeing the police emboldened in a way that they haven't been? I mean, definitely not in 3 years, but perhaps long before then. The goal of all this, I think, in some ways, is to attempt to kind of